Tonight, dear friend, we travel back to the high mountains of the American frontier, where the morning mist clings to endless pine forests, and one solitary watchman begins another peaceful day above the clouds. Long before airplanes, satellites, or radio towers, the safety of thousands of acres rested in the patient eyes of a single mountain fire lookout. The introduction gently invites the listener into a calm world of crisp mountain air, birdsong, lantern light, and quiet responsibility without rushing into historical facts. Tonight, dear friend, we travel back in time to the rugged mountains of the American frontier. Before railroads stitched the nation together, and long before airplanes could glance over endless forests from above, the safety of countless acres often depended upon a single quiet observer. Our journey leads us to one such place, perched high among rocky ridges where the wind carries the scent of pine needles and cool stone. It is a place where mornings arrive slowly, wrapped in silver mist, and where silence feels less like emptiness than an old companion. As always, settle into a comfortable position. Allow your breathing to become gentle and unhurried. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight. Together, we will simply spend a peaceful day with a forgotten guardian of the mountains, watching the wilderness awaken one quiet moment at a time. The sky above the eastern horizon is only beginning to soften. Stars still shimmer faintly overhead, though their brilliance fades as dawn patiently approaches. The moon hangs low beyond distant peaks, casting a pale glow upon forests that seem to stretch forever. Below, valleys remain hidden beneath blankets of cool morning fog, while tall ponderosa pines stand motionless, their dark silhouettes reaching toward the fading night. High above those sleeping forests rests a modest wooden lookout cabin. It is not grand. It was never meant to be. Its weathered pine boards have endured years of mountain winds, summer heat, heavy rain, and winter snow. Every scratch along its walls tells a quiet story of seasons patiently passing. The small cabin sits upon a rocky summit where every direction opens into an astonishing panorama of forests, rivers, distant ridges, and endless sky. Inside, another day quietly begins. A narrow iron stove still holds the last faint warmth from the evening before. Ash rests peacefully beneath blackened logs, waiting for fresh firewood. A simple wooden table occupies one corner beside a neatly folded wool blanket. Nearby rests a leather-bound journal whose pages have slowly filled with careful observations written over many months. Nothing inside feels luxurious. Everything feels purposeful. The man who calls this lonely summit home slowly opens his eyes. He is perhaps in his early 40s, though mountain life has etched gentle lines across his face that make guessing his age difficult. His beard is neatly trimmed, touched with threads of gray. His heavy wool shirt hangs from a wooden peg beside a thick canvas coat, both carefully brushed free of yesterday's dust before bedtime. For a few moments, he simply listens. The mountain always speaks first. Some mornings it offers nothing more than stillness. Today, faint sounds drift through the open window. A distant thrush begins its first cheerful song. Another bird answers farther down the slope. Somewhere below, a small creek continues its endless conversation with smooth stones, its quiet murmur carried upward by cool morning air. Satisfied that the weather remains calm, the lookout rises slowly from his simple bed. The rough pine floor feels cool beneath thick wool socks. He stretches carefully, easing stiff muscles earned not through hurried labor but from countless hours standing upon observation platforms, scanning horizons with patient eyes. He adds 2 split logs to the stove. A few curls of dry cedar kindling catch quickly beneath a glowing ember hidden among yesterday's ashes. Soon the little cabin fills once more with gentle crackling. There is something wonderfully comforting about the first fire of the morning. Its warmth arrives gradually, never hurried, never demanding attention. As the room begins to warm, he reaches for a battered tin kettle hanging beside the stove. Fresh spring water collected the previous afternoon is poured inside before the kettle settles atop the iron surface. Soon, faint wisps of steam begin dancing upward. Coffee on the American frontier is rarely luxurious, yet it is deeply appreciated. He measures coarse coffee grounds with practiced movements, never needing scales or careful calculation. Years of quiet repetition have taught his hands exactly how much each morning requires. While waiting for the kettle, he steps outside. The mountain greets him with crisp air carrying the refreshing scent of pine resin, damp earth, and distant wildflowers hidden among rocky meadows below. The sunrise has not yet fully arrived. Instead, soft ribbons of lavender and pale gold slowly brighten the eastern sky. Clouds resting below the summit glow gently, transforming the valleys into quiet seas of white mist. It almost appears as though the cabin floats above the clouds themselves. He breathes deeply. No city smoke reaches this place. No factory whistles interrupt the dawn. Only wind. Only birds. Only the patient rhythm of nature waking one peaceful moment after another. Nearby stands the observation platform built from sturdy timbers anchored directly into solid rock. A polished brass spyglass rests beneath a protective canvas cover, carefully shielded from weather during the night. He removes the cover. Tiny droplets of dew sparkle upon polished metal before disappearing beneath the first gentle warmth of dawn. The spyglass is neither ornate nor decorative. It is simply one of his most trusted companions. Patiently, he adjusts its position toward the eastern forests. The first sweep across the landscape begins. His movements are slow and methodical. He never rushes. Every hillside receives equal attention. Every valley deserves a careful glance. Far below, morning fog drifts between towering pines like slow-moving rivers of white silk. Nothing unusual appears, exactly as he hopes. A quiet mountain is a safe mountain. Satisfied, he reaches into his coat pocket and removes a small leather notebook along with a graphite pencil worn smooth through months of careful use. His handwriting is remarkably neat despite cold mornings and rough conditions. Today's first entry reads simply, "Clear skies before sunrise, gentle western breeze, visibility excellent. No smoke observed." Only a few words. Yet together they become another page in the mountain's long memory. Back inside the cabin, the kettle now sings softly. He pours steaming water into a blue enamel mug whose chipped rim reveals years of faithful service. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingles with the comforting scent of burning cedar. Breakfast is equally modest. A thick slice of yesterday's bread, salt-cured bacon warmed gently in a small cast-iron skillet, perhaps a little apple butter preserved during autumn, sometimes dried berries, sometimes oatmeal, never extravagant, always enough. He eats slowly beside the window overlooking endless forests. There is no reason to hurry. The mountain measures time differently. Each sunrise feels complete. Each meal deserves quiet appreciation. Outside, sunlight finally spills across distant peaks. Golden light touches the highest treetops first before slowly descending toward valleys still wrapped in shadow. The transformation happens so gradually that it almost feels invisible. Yet within minutes, the wilderness becomes alive with gentle color. Dark green pines, golden grasses, gray granite cliffs, tiny flashes of blue where distant rivers reflect the morning sky. A red squirrel scurries across a nearby fallen log, pausing only briefly to inspect the cabin before disappearing into the forest once again. Moments later, 2 mule deer emerge cautiously from the trees below. Their ears twitch at every unfamiliar sound, though nothing threatens this peaceful morning. They graze quietly among wild grasses sparkling with dew. The lookout smiles gently. He has watched generations of deer visit these slopes over the years. Some mornings feel wonderfully familiar. After breakfast, another important routine begins. He checks each piece of equipment carefully: the brass compass, the weather thermometer mounted beneath the shaded porch, a simple rain gauge, his field glasses, signal flags folded neatly inside a wooden chest, extra lantern oil. Each item receives patient attention, because high upon these mountains, even small problems become important when help may be many hours, or even days, away. Preparation itself becomes a form of peace. Everything has its purpose. Everything has its purpose. As the sun climbs higher above the eastern horizon, gentle breezes begin moving through the tall pines. Their branches whisper softly together. The sound resembles distant ocean waves. Slow, endless, comforting. Standing upon the observation deck once more, the lookout removes his hat briefly, allowing cool mountain air to brush through his hair. Another ordinary day has begun. Another peaceful watch awaits, and somewhere beyond the countless forests stretching toward every horizon, thousands of settlers, ranchers, travelers, and families will never know the quiet man standing above them, faithfully watching over the wilderness from his lonely mountain home. Yet that has never troubled him. The mountain itself is enough company, and for today, it asks only one simple thing: to keep watching the endless wilderness. The morning sun had now climbed above the eastern ridges, washing the vast wilderness with soft golden light. Shadows that had stretched across the valleys only moments before slowly retreated beneath towering pines, revealing countless shades of green that reached farther than any road or settlement. From the observation platform, the lookout rested both hands lightly upon the smooth wooden railing. Years of mountain winds had polished the timber until it felt almost silky beneath his fingertips. The wood carried the faint scent of pine resin warmed by the growing sunlight. Another watch had begun. Unlike many occupations on the frontier, this work rarely announced itself with noise. There were no factory whistles, no crowded streets, and no hurried voices calling one another across busy marketplaces. Instead, every hour unfolded quietly. Patience itself became the day's greatest responsibility. The brass spyglass caught a gentle glimmer of sunlight as he slowly turned it toward the southern valleys. He never swept the horizon quickly. Experience had taught him that hurried eyes often overlooked the smallest details. Every distant ridge deserved careful attention. Every narrow canyon held its own secrets. Even the smallest ribbon of smoke could tell an important story. Most mornings, however, the mountains offered only peace. A family of mule deer wandered across a grassy clearing nearly 2 miles away. Through the magnified lens, their movements appeared calm and deliberate. A young fawn paused beside its mother before lowering its head to nibble fresh summer grass. The lookout smiled quietly. He had watched countless generations of wildlife pass through these forests. They had become familiar neighbors whose routines changed with the seasons far more reliably than any calendar. Above the valley, a red-tailed hawk floated effortlessly upon invisible currents of warm air. Its broad wings scarcely moved as it circled higher and higher, surveying the land from a perspective not unlike the lookout's own. For several peaceful moments, man and bird shared the same silent task: to observe, to notice, to remain still. A cool breeze drifted across the summit, carrying with it the fragrance of sunlit pine needles, damp moss hidden beneath shaded rocks, and the faint sweetness of blooming mountain flowers scattered along nearby slopes. The mountain was never truly silent. It simply spoke in quieter ways. The gentle rustling of evergreen branches, the distant tapping of a woodpecker somewhere below, the soft chatter of squirrels darting through fallen logs. Even the whisper of wind sliding across granite cliffs carried its own familiar rhythm. He reached once more for the leather-bound journal resting inside the cabin. Each observation was recorded with remarkable care. Time, wind direction, cloud movement, visibility, temperature, wildlife sightings, any unusual sounds, any trace of smoke. The entries were simple, yet together they formed a patient history of the mountain itself. Few people would ever read those pages, yet each line represented another peaceful day faithfully remembered. As the sun climbed higher, patches of morning mist began disappearing from the valleys below. Rivers that had been hidden beneath silver fog gradually revealed themselves, winding like polished ribbons through forests and open meadows. In the distance, a narrow trail became visible. It twisted gently through the mountains before vanishing once again beneath dense stands of pine. Travelers occasionally used that path. Hunters, surveyors, mail riders, sometimes entire families seeking new opportunities farther west. From this height, however, they appeared no larger than tiny moving shadows. The lookout raised his field glasses. Far below, two horses slowly emerged from a wooded bend. Their riders traveled at an unhurried pace, allowing the animals to choose careful footing along the rocky trail. No waving was necessary. No conversation could possibly reach such a distance. Still, the lookout tipped his hat toward them out of quiet habit. Perhaps they never noticed. That hardly mattered. The gesture simply acknowledged another human life passing peacefully through the wilderness. Near the cabin, a pair of cheerful mountain bluebirds landed upon the fence surrounding the small vegetable patch. They hopped between rows of beans and onions while searching for insects stirred by the warming earth. The little garden occupied only a modest corner beside the cabin. It would never feed a family, yet it offered fresh vegetables during the long summer months and brought a comforting touch of ordinary life to an otherwise isolated mountaintop. He bent to inspect several tomato vines supported by handmade wooden stakes. Tiny green fruits had begun appearing. They would need many more weeks beneath the summer sun before ripening into deep shades of red. There was no way to hurry them. Nature preferred its own quiet schedule, and anyone living upon the mountains soon learned the wisdom of accepting that gentle pace. He watered each plant carefully using a small wooden bucket filled from the spring that trickled from a rocky ledge just below the summit. Every drop mattered during the warmer months, and he never wasted what the mountain so generously provided. The cool water disappeared quietly into the dark soil, releasing the rich scent of damp earth into the fresh morning air. Nearby, several neat stacks of split firewood rested beneath a simple lean-to roof. Although summer had only recently settled across the high country, winter preparations had already begun. Mountain weather possessed a habit of arriving without invitation. A warm afternoon could easily be followed by an unexpectedly cold night, reminding every frontier resident that comfort was earned through quiet preparation rather than hopeful expectation. He ran a weathered hand across one of the neatly stacked logs. Dry, solid, ready when needed. That simple certainty brought its own quiet satisfaction. The lookout returned to the observation platform, where the mountains seemed even more expansive beneath the growing light. From this height, the forests appeared almost endless. Great waves of evergreen trees rolled across hills and valleys until they disappeared into a blue horizon softened by distance. It was beautiful, yet beauty alone was never the reason he watched so carefully. Among those millions of trees lived farming families, lumber camps, lonely cabins, grazing cattle, and small frontier settlements connected only by rough wagon roads. A single unattended fire could travel with frightening speed when dry winds swept across the mountains. Fortunately, this morning gave no cause for concern. The breeze remained gentle. The air felt pleasantly cool. Small white clouds drifted lazily overhead, casting slow-moving patches of shade across distant ridges. His eyes followed those shadows almost absent-mindedly. Years of experience had trained him to recognize familiar patterns. He could often tell whether a cloud would dissolve harmlessly or slowly gather into an afternoon shower simply by watching its shape and movement. Nature always offered small clues. One simply needed patience to notice them. A faint, jingling sound floated upward from the trail below. Not birds, not wind, metal. The soft rhythm became clearer with each passing minute. Soon a sturdy mule appeared from between the pines, carrying 2 heavy wooden crates fastened securely across its back. Behind the patient animal walked an older supply driver wearing a faded, broad-brimmed hat and dusty leather boots. His gray beard moved gently with every steady step along the rocky path. The lookout smiled before the man had even reached the summit. Monthly supplies were always welcome, though never treated as an exciting event. Rather, they marked another peaceful turning of the calendar. "Morning to you," the older man called warmly as he reached the cabin. "And a fine morning it is," the lookout replied. The mule seemed equally pleased to arrive. It lowered its head toward a nearby patch of grass while the 2 men carefully loosened the leather straps securing the cargo. Inside the crates rested simple necessities: fresh coffee, flour, salt, beans, dried apples, lamp oil, writing paper, a few newspapers from a town several days away. Perhaps most precious of all was a small bundle of handwritten letters wrapped carefully inside oilcloth to protect them from unexpected rain. Letters traveled slowly across the American frontier. Sometimes they arrived weeks after being written, sometimes months. Yet every envelope carried the familiar handwriting of family members or old friends whose lives continued far below these quiet mountains. The lookout accepted them with genuine gratitude. He would read them later, perhaps after supper, when the day's observations had been completed and the mountain settled once again beneath evening light. For now, duty still came first. The 2 men shared a modest midday meal outside the cabin. Fresh bread, a little smoked ham, sharp cheddar cheese, cool spring water served from a stoneware jug. Conversation moved as slowly as the clouds overhead. The supply driver spoke of repaired bridges, new homesteads appearing in distant valleys, and children beginning lessons in a recently built schoolhouse. The lookout listened with quiet interest, happy simply to hear gentle stories from the world below without feeling any desire to leave his peaceful post. After nearly an hour, the mule was loaded once again, this time with empty sacks, worn equipment needing repair, and several completed weather reports destined for the nearest ranger office. The older man adjusted his hat. "I'll see you next month." "Safe travels," the lookout answered. Neither man hurried the farewell. There was no need. Soon the steady sound of hoofbeats faded back into the whispering forest until only birdsong remained. Silence returned almost immediately. Not an uncomfortable silence, a familiar one. The lookout climbed once more to the observation deck and rested the brass spyglass against his shoulder. The afternoon sun now illuminated every distant ridge with remarkable clarity. Somewhere beyond those blue mountains, countless lives continued their ordinary routines. Farmers harvested hay. Children chased one another through dusty streets. Blacksmiths shaped glowing iron. Stagecoaches rolled steadily westward. Yet here, high above it all, time seemed to move differently. The mountain neither hurried nor delayed. It simply endured. The lookout opened his journal one more time and carefully recorded the day's small events in neat, measured handwriting before lifting his eyes toward the western horizon, where a few taller clouds had begun quietly gathering above the farthest peaks. They were still harmless, still beautiful, but they hinted that tomorrow's watch might offer something new. Visitors from the valley. By the middle of the afternoon, the mountain had settled into one of its quietest moods. The sunlight no longer carried the bright freshness of morning. Instead, it poured gently across the western slopes, warming weathered granite and filling the pine forests with soft golden light. Every shadow had become longer, stretching peacefully between the trees like slow-moving rivers of cool darkness. The lookout leaned comfortably against the wooden railing of the observation deck. There was no smoke, no sign of danger, only miles upon miles of peaceful wilderness breathing beneath a clear summer sky. Days like this were never considered uneventful. Quite the opposite. A calm mountain was the finest report any lookout could hope to record. Far below, the breeze stirred the tops of countless ponderosa pines. From this height, they swayed together so gently that the entire forest seemed almost alive, like a vast green ocean moving beneath invisible waves. He removed his hat for a moment, allowing the warm breeze to cool his forehead. The mountain smelled different now than it had before sunrise. Morning had carried damp earth and fresh dew. Afternoon brought the comforting fragrance of warmed pine bark, dry grasses, sunlit stone, and distant wild sage growing among the rocky slopes. Every hour possessed its own scent. Every season offered its own quiet personality. Not long afterward, a tiny movement along the eastern trail caught his attention. Without urgency, he lifted the brass spyglass. A lone rider slowly climbed the winding mountain path. Horse and rider moved patiently together, never rushing the steep ascent. The horse occasionally lowered its head to find easier footing among loose stones, while its rider sat quietly in the saddle, allowing the animal to choose the safest path. The lookout smiled. He recognized both of them. It was Thomas, the monthly mail carrier. Thomas had spent nearly 15 years traveling remote mountain trails, carrying letters, newspapers, and small parcels between isolated settlements that otherwise remained separated by weeks of difficult travel. His clothing reflected years of honest work. A faded blue wool shirt rested beneath a weathered buckskin vest. His broad felt hat had long since lost its original shape after countless storms. Dust covered his leather boots almost every day of the year. Yet despite the long miles, Thomas almost always arrived with an easy smile. When he finally reached the summit, he removed his hat politely. "Afternoon!" he called cheerfully. "Afternoon, Thomas!" The two men shook hands warmly. There was no ceremony, only the quiet familiarity earned through years of dependable visits. The horse gratefully accepted a bucket of cool spring water, while Thomas carefully untied a leather mailbag fastened behind the saddle. Inside rested only a handful of envelopes, several official reports, a folded newspaper from Denver, one small parcel wrapped carefully in brown paper, and a letter addressed to the lookout in neat, familiar handwriting. He recognized the writing immediately, his younger sister. She lived nearly 300 miles away with her husband and 2 young children. The letter had likely traveled by train, wagon, horseback, and finally Thomas's patient horse before reaching this lonely summit. Such journeys required remarkable cooperation long before modern transportation existed. Letters moved slowly, but somehow that made them even more precious. Thomas accepted a steaming mug of fresh coffee while the horse rested nearby beneath the shade of several tall pines. The men sat upon a rough-hewn bench outside the cabin. Conversation wandered naturally. No one hurried. Thomas spoke of growing frontier towns farther east, a new bridge crossing a wide river, fresh crops planted by farming families, children gathering wild berries near mountain streams, a traveling doctor who had recently arrived in one settlement after weeks upon the trail. None of these stories felt dramatic. That was precisely what made them comforting. They reminded both men that ordinary life continued peacefully beyond the forests. The lookout listened with genuine interest. Although solitude suited him well, Hearing familiar voices every few weeks quietly refreshed the spirit. Soon the conversation drifted toward the mountains themselves. Thomas remarked that wildflowers covered the southern meadows more beautifully than he could remember. Blue lupines, Indian paintbrush, golden sunflowers, small white daisies dancing in the breeze. The lookout nodded. He had noticed the same thing from above. Nature often painted the mountains differently each summer. No two seasons were ever exactly alike. After finishing their coffee, the two men walked slowly toward the edge of the observation platform. Thomas gazed across the endless forests. "I don't believe I'll ever grow tired of this view." The lookout smiled softly. "Neither have I." For several peaceful minutes, neither man spoke another word. There was simply nothing more that needed saying. The mountains themselves filled the silence. Far overhead, an eagle circled effortlessly upon warm afternoon currents. Its broad wings barely moved. Below, sunlight shimmered upon a narrow river winding through distant valleys. Somewhere deep within the forest came the faint rhythmic tapping of a woodpecker. Everything else remained wonderfully still. Eventually, Thomas stood and gathered the empty coffee mug. "I'd best be moving. The trail won't grow any shorter." Both men laughed quietly. The lookout helped tighten the leather straps, securing the mailbag once again. The horse snorted gently as if equally ready to continue the journey. With one final wave, Thomas guided the horse back onto the narrow mountain trail, slowly, patiently. Soon both rider and horse disappeared among towering pines. The sound of steady hoofbeats gradually faded into silence. The lookout remained watching long after they had vanished, not because he expected them to return, but because quiet departures deserved the same appreciation as quiet arrivals. As afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, another pair of unexpected visitors appeared. This time they were not travelers. A family of bighorn sheep emerged from rocky cliffs just below the summit. A large ram led the group carefully across narrow ledges, followed by two ewes and their young lambs. The animals moved with astonishing confidence over steep rocks that would have challenged even the most experienced climber. The lookout rested his elbows upon the railing. Watching wildlife had become one of the greatest quiet pleasures of mountain life. He knew many of their seasonal habits. Where deer preferred to graze, when elk crossed northern valleys, which cliffs belonged to nesting eagles, when hummingbirds visited the wildflowers surrounding the cabin. Without realizing it, he had become as much a student of nature as a guardian of the forest. As the sun slowly descended toward the western horizon, the mountains transformed once again. Golden light deepened into rich amber. The forests below became darker shades of emerald. Long purple shadows stretched across distant ridges. The sky glowed with gentle colors of orange, rose, and pale violet. The lookout opened his leather journal. With calm, careful handwriting, he wrote the final observations of the day. Mail delivered safely. Clear skies throughout the afternoon. Visitors included Thomas, the mail carrier. Wildlife abundant. No smoke observed. Another peaceful watch completed. He closed the journal with quiet satisfaction. The mountain had remained safe. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise, another careful watch, another ordinary day high above the American frontier. And somehow, those ordinary days were becoming the most extraordinary part of all. Summer above the clouds. The final glow of yesterday's sunset had quietly faded into memory, and once again the mountain welcomed a new morning with remarkable patience. Long before the first rays of sunlight reached the summit, the lookout awoke to the familiar whisper of wind brushing through towering pines. The cabin remained comfortably cool, carrying the pleasant scent of seasoned firewood, weathered timber, and the faint aroma of yesterday's coffee lingering near the iron stove. Outside, the world rested beneath a gentle veil of silver-blue twilight. The stars had not yet disappeared. They lingered overhead, shining softly above an ocean of dark forests stretching across the American frontier. Below the summit, thick bands of mist drifted slowly through the valleys, wrapping rivers and meadows in quiet mystery. The lookout stepped onto the porch carrying his favorite enamel mug. He paused before taking his first sip. This peaceful moment had become one of his most treasured rituals. There was no conversation, no schedule demanding immediate attention, only the mountain greeting another ordinary day. Far away, a single meadowlark began its cheerful morning song. Within moments, another answered from a distant hillside. Soon dozens of birds joined together until the entire forest seemed to awaken in gentle harmony. The lookout smiled quietly. He could often tell the season simply by listening. Spring brought eager songs from newly arrived birds. Summer filled the mountains with confident voices from creatures raising their young. Autumn became quieter, more reflective, as many birds prepared for their long migrations south. Today sounded unmistakably like midsummer. Warm, content, alive. After recording the morning weather, he climbed onto the observation deck with his brass spyglass. The sky remained brilliantly clear. Visibility stretched for nearly 50 miles. Individual ridgelines appeared one behind another, each fading gently into softer shades of blue until they disappeared beyond the horizon. Some mornings the mountains resembled enormous ocean waves frozen in time. The lookout slowly scanned each section of forest. His movements had become almost meditative. He began with the eastern valleys, continued toward the southern slopes, paused over several rocky canyons, finished by examining distant western peaks where afternoon storms sometimes formed during the hottest months. Nothing unusual disturbed the wilderness. Smoke from a distant homestead rose straight into the calm morning air. Thin, white, predictable, exactly where it belonged. He made a careful note inside his journal before setting the pencil aside. Nearby, tiny drops of dew still clung to the cabin's wildflower garden. Bright blue lupines swayed gently beside patches of crimson Indian paintbrush, while clusters of golden balsam roots stretched toward the rising sun. Bees floated lazily from blossom to blossom, entirely occupied with their quiet work. Several butterflies drifted through the flowers almost weightlessly. Orange, yellow, pale white. Their delicate wings caught the sunlight with every graceful movement. The lookout watched them for several minutes. Mountain life had taught him something city life rarely could. Not every beautiful moment required a purpose. Some existed simply to be noticed. A soft rustling sound came from beyond the vegetable garden. Turning slowly, he spotted a snowshoe hare nibbling clover beneath the shade of a young pine tree. Its long ears twitched at every unfamiliar sound. For a brief moment, both man and animal remained perfectly still, studying one another without fear. Then, with 3 effortless leaps, the little hare disappeared into the forest. The lookout chuckled softly. Encounters like these happened almost every day, yet somehow they never became ordinary. As the morning continued, warmer air began climbing the mountainsides. Gentle currents carried the sweet fragrance of sun-warmed pine needles mixed with the earthy scent of granite, slowly releasing the night's coolness. Far overhead, white clouds drifted lazily across an endless blue sky. They cast enormous moving shadows over valleys below, creating beautiful patterns that slowly crossed forests, rivers, and meadows. Watching those shadows became another quiet pastime. Sometimes they revealed hidden lakes sparkling beneath sunlight. Sometimes entire hillsides seemed to disappear beneath cool darkness before returning once more into brilliant light. Nature painted constantly. No brush, no canvas, only sunlight. Near midday, the lookout walked along a narrow footpath circling the summit. It was a habit he rarely missed. The short walk allowed him to inspect nearby trees, clear small stones from the trail, and observe any changes around the cabin after strong winds or passing storms. Wild strawberries had begun ripening beside several large boulders. Their bright red color stood out vividly against green leaves. He picked only a few, just enough for lunch. Mountain living encouraged moderation. Taking only what one needed ensured the wilderness remained generous season after season. From another rocky overlook, he paused once again. The view from this side of the summit differed entirely from the observation platform. Instead of endless forests, steep granite cliffs dropped dramatically toward a narrow river winding hundreds of feet below. The river reflected sunlight like polished silver. Occasionally, trout leaped from the water's surface, creating tiny circles that quickly vanished into the flowing current. The sound never quite reached the summit, yet somehow the lookout could almost imagine it. A cool breeze arrived from the north, gently lifting the brim of his felt hat. The wind carried a different scent now: fresh water, wild mint, and the faint sweetness of flowering mountain sage. Every direction possessed its own fragrance. Every valley held its own character. Returning to the cabin, he prepared a simple midday meal. Fresh bread baked several days earlier, a slice of smoked ham, sharp cheddar, a handful of wild strawberries, cool spring water, nothing extravagant. Yet everything tasted richer beneath the open mountain sky. After lunch, he rested for a few quiet minutes in a wooden rocking chair positioned beside the cabin door. The chair creaked softly with each gentle movement. A pair of hummingbirds darted among nearby blossoms, their tiny wings humming almost invisibly. They hovered only inches from bright red flowers before vanishing like tiny emerald flashes into the surrounding trees. The lookout never attempted to count them. Some things became more enjoyable simply by allowing them to come and go freely. The afternoon remained comfortably warm, though never unpleasant. From high upon the summit, cool mountain breezes softened even the brightest summer days. He climbed once more to the observation deck and slowly lifted the spyglass toward the western horizon. Far away, beyond 3 distant ridgelines, several towering white clouds had begun rising a little higher than before. Their edges remained brilliantly sunlit. Their bases showed only the faintest hint of gray. He watched them thoughtfully. There was no concern. Not yet. Summer afternoons often built magnificent clouds that quietly dissolved before sunset. Still, experience encouraged careful observation rather than assumption. He noted their position in the journal, closed its weathered cover, and rested both hands upon the familiar wooden railing. Below him, the forests continued their endless whisper. Above him, the sky stretched calm and immeasurable. And somewhere beyond those peaceful clouds, tomorrow's story was already beginning to take shape. An afternoon of quiet rain. The western clouds that had seemed so harmless only an hour before continued their slow and graceful climb into the summer sky. From the observation platform, the lookout rested his brass spyglass against the smooth wooden railing and watched them with calm attention. There was nothing unusual about their appearance. Summer afternoons often invited clouds to gather above the higher peaks before drifting away as evening approached. Still, experience encouraged observation rather than assumption. The clouds were taller now. Their brilliant white tops still reflected warm sunlight, while their lower edges had become a softer shade of gray. He opened his leather journal. 2:15 p.m. cumulus clouds increasing over the western ridge. Wind remains light from the southwest. Visibility excellent. His pencil moved slowly across the page. Each note required only a few words. Yet over months and years, those quiet entries became a faithful record of the mountain's changing moods. Closing the journal, he turned once again toward the endless forests below. The breeze had changed. only slightly. Instead of carrying the warm scent of sun-baked pine needles, it now brought cooler air from the higher elevations. Mixed within it was the unmistakable fragrance of damp stone and distant rain, though not a single drop had yet reached the summit. Mountain weather often announced itself long before anyone could see it. The lookout had learned to trust his senses. Far below, the tops of the tallest pines began swaying together with a little more purpose than before. Their gentle whisper grew into a deeper, more rhythmic sound, like waves quietly rolling across a distant shore. The forest never resisted the wind. It simply moved with it. High overhead, a small flock of ravens crossed the valley. Unlike the cheerful bluebirds that lingered near the cabin, ravens preferred the higher currents. They glided effortlessly across the widening sky, their dark wings rising and falling with slow confidence. For several moments, the lookout followed their flight. Then, almost together, the birds turned toward the eastern ridges, disappearing beyond a line of towering evergreens. Perhaps they, too, had sensed the coming rain. Near the cabin, the vegetable garden seemed to welcome the changing weather. The leaves of the bean plants fluttered gently. The tomato vines bent gracefully beneath the cool breeze. The rich scent of damp soil grew stronger, although the ground remained dry beneath his boots. He walked down from the tower and secured several lightweight tools beneath the porch roof. A wooden rake, a coil of rope, an empty bucket. There was no urgency. These small preparations had become part of every summer afternoon. Inside the cabin, he checked the oil lantern hanging near the doorway. Its glass chimney had been carefully cleaned only 2 evenings before. The wick remained neatly trimmed. If rain lingered into nightfall, the warm glow of that lantern would soon fill the single-room cabin with quiet comfort. Satisfied, he placed it back upon its hook. The first distant rumble reached the summit. It was so faint that it almost blended with the wind itself. Not sharp, not startling. Only a low, rolling murmur somewhere far beyond the western mountains. The lookout paused to listen. Silence returned. A few moments later, another gentle rumble drifted across the valleys. Still distant, still peaceful, he smiled softly. Thunder in the mountains often sounded more like conversation than warning. The enormous ridges carried each echo from one peak to another until it slowly faded into the wilderness. Looking west once more, he noticed that a delicate curtain of rain had begun falling many miles away. Sunlight still illuminated the distant valley, causing the rainfall to shimmer like threads of silver stretching from cloud to earth. It was a beautiful sight, almost dreamlike. The rain moved slowly across the landscape, watering forests that had stood beneath countless summer storms long before the first frontier settlers ever arrived. The lookout leaned comfortably against the railing. There was nothing he could do to guide the weather. His task was simply to witness it. The wind strengthened slightly. Loose pine needles danced across the wooden platform before disappearing over the edge. A cool drop of water landed quietly upon the back of his hand. Then another. Several moments passed before a few more followed. The rain had reached the summit. It arrived gently, without drama. Tiny drops tapped softly against the cabin roof, creating a pleasant rhythm that blended beautifully with the whispering pines. The lookout remained outside for a little while longer. His felt hat sheltered his face while the light shower cooled the warm afternoon air. Nearby, the wildflowers bowed beneath sparkling beads of rain. Each blossom seemed brighter than before. The scent of wet earth quickly spread across the mountaintop. Fresh pine resin, moist moss, rain-soaked bark. The mountain breathed differently now. Even the colors changed. The deep greens of the forest became richer. Gray granite darkened with moisture. The weathered cabin walls took on a warm reddish-brown tone beneath the rain. everything appeared softer, calmer. As the shower continued, he stepped inside and settled into the sturdy wooden rocking chair beside the front window. The chair creaked gently beneath his weight. Resting the unopened letter from his sister upon the small table, he chose instead to simply watch the rain. There would be time for reading later. For now, the mountain itself offered all the company he needed. Tiny streams began forming along the rocky slope below the cabin, weaving between patches of wild grass before disappearing into the forest. A pair of chipmunks hurried beneath the shelter of a fallen log. One curious rabbit remained perfectly still beneath a thick evergreen branch, seemingly content to wait until the shower had passed. The lookout wrapped both hands around a warm mug of freshly brewed coffee. Steam rose slowly into the cool cabin air. Outside, the gentle rain continued its patient song upon the wooden roof. Inside, the only sounds were the quiet crackle of a few pieces of kindling in the small iron stove and the slow ticking of the brass clock hanging on the cabin wall. It was impossible to hurry such an afternoon, nor would anyone have wished to. Sometimes the most memorable days upon the mountain were those when almost nothing happened at all. And as the peaceful rain settled across the endless American frontier, the lookout felt once again that quiet certainty which had kept him faithfully returning to this lonely summit year after year. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise. But this afternoon belonged entirely to the rain, the evening lantern. The gentle rain remained for most of the afternoon. It never became heavy enough to trouble the mountain, nor did it hurry across the landscape with loud winds or flashing skies. Instead, it settled softly over the forests like a comforting blanket, nourishing the trees, filling hidden springs, and washing a thin layer of summer dust from every leaf and stone. Inside the cabin, the lookout sat quietly beside the open window. The cool air carried the refreshing fragrance of rain-soaked pine needles, damp cedar bark, and rich mountain earth. Every now and then, a slightly stronger breeze wandered through the room, gently stirring the pages of the weather journal resting on the wooden table. He reached over and carefully closed it. There would be another entry before nightfall. Outside, tiny drops continued falling from the cabin roof in a slow, steady rhythm. Plink, plink, plink. Each drop landed in the same shallow puddle beside the porch steps, creating circles that quietly disappeared into one another. The mountain had become wonderfully still. Even the birds seemed content to wait. A robin perched beneath the thick branches of a spruce tree, occasionally fluffing its feathers to shake away the moisture. Nearby, a pair of chickadees hopped from branch to branch, already resuming their cheerful conversations as the rain gradually weakened. The lookout smiled. Nature rarely remained silent for long. As the shower slowly passed eastward, pale sunlight began filtering through breaks in the clouds. At first, it appeared only as a soft glow along the western horizon. Then, little by little, warm golden light spilled across the distant ridges. The wet forests shimmered beautifully. Every pine needle reflected tiny points of light. The granite cliffs sparkled where rainwater still flowed in narrow ribbons toward the valleys below. It seemed as though the entire mountain had been quietly polished. The lookout stepped outside once more. The wooden porch felt cool beneath his boots. Small beads of water clung to the railing, catching the afternoon light like scattered crystals. He rested one hand upon the weathered timber, smooth, cool, familiar. Across the valley, a magnificent rainbow slowly appeared. Its colors were gentle rather than brilliant, soft red, warm gold, pale green, deep blue. The arch stretched gracefully from one forested ridge to another before slowly fading into the mist beyond. He admired it without feeling the need to linger. Rainbows were gifts best appreciated quietly. They never remained for very long. Returning to the observation platform, he lifted the brass spyglass toward the western slopes. The storm had completely passed. Visibility had become even clearer than before the rain. Freshly washed air revealed distant peaks that had remained hidden beneath the afternoon haze only hours earlier. Cabins tucked deep within the valleys now stood out more clearly. Narrow rivers reflected the lowering sun. Even winding wagon trails could be followed farther into the wilderness than usual. He carefully examined each familiar landmark. No smoke, no fallen trees, no signs of damage. Only peaceful forests drinking deeply after a welcome summer shower. Satisfied, he opened the journal once again. 5:42 p.m. light rainfall concluded. Air exceptionally clear. Visibility excellent. No fire activity observed. His handwriting remained as careful as ever. Each day's observations joined hundreds of previous entries. Together, they quietly told the story of the mountain itself. Clouds, snowfalls, bird migrations, changing seasons, quiet days, stormy nights, everything carefully remembered. As evening slowly approached, the temperature began to fall. The breeze turned noticeably cooler. The lookout gathered several dry pieces of split pine from beneath the lean-to and carried them inside. He placed them neatly beside the small iron stove. Only a modest fire would be needed tonight. Summer evenings at this elevation could become surprisingly cool after rain. With practiced hands, he arranged the wood carefully. One small twist of dry cedar bark, several thin sticks, 2 larger logs resting above them. A single match brought everything quietly to life. Within moments, gentle flames danced behind the cast iron door. The cabin gradually filled with comforting warmth. The scent of burning pine mixed pleasantly with the lingering freshness of the rain outside. It was one of his favorite combinations. Simple, honest, timeless. As twilight settled across the mountains, the lookout finally picked up the letter that had arrived the previous day. He broke the wax seal carefully. Inside were several neatly folded pages. His sister described ordinary family life. Her eldest son had begun helping with chores around their small farm. Her youngest daughter had learned to read simple storybooks and now insisted on reading aloud every evening before supper. The family orchard promised an excellent apple harvest if early frosts remained away. A neighbor had recently completed building a new red barn. Another family planned to move west before winter. Nothing extraordinary, only the gentle rhythm of everyday life. The lookout found himself smiling more than once as he read. Although many miles separated them, these simple words quietly bridged the distance. He folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope. One day he would write back, perhaps tomorrow evening. There was never any reason to rush thoughtful words. Outside, the sky slowly transformed into deeper shades of blue. The first evening star appeared above the eastern horizon. Soon another joined it, then another. One by one, the heavens quietly awakened. The lookout stepped outside carrying the oil lantern. He struck a match. The small flame caught the trimmed wick immediately. Golden light spread softly through the clear glass chimney. He hung the lantern upon its familiar hook beside the cabin door. Its gentle glow served several purposes. It welcomed any unexpected traveler who might arrive after sunset. It illuminated the porch steps. And perhaps most importantly, it reminded the lonely mountain that someone still kept faithful watch. The lantern swayed ever so slightly in the cool evening breeze. Its warm light contrasted beautifully against the deepening blue of the surrounding forest. Somewhere below, a small creek sang a little more loudly than before, swollen by the afternoon rain. An owl called from a distant pine. The sound drifted through the quiet valley before fading into the gathering darkness. The lookout leaned comfortably against the porch railing. Above him stretched an endless sky. Below him rested an endless forest. Between them stood one small wooden cabin, one lantern, one faithful guardian, and another peaceful day upon the American frontier had gently reached its close. The quiet days between seasons. Morning returned without ceremony. There was no dramatic sunrise, no sudden change in the mountain's mood. Instead, the darkness gradually softened into deep shades of blue as the first light quietly touched the highest peaks beyond the lookout station. The oil lantern beside the cabin door had nearly exhausted its fuel for the night. Its gentle flame flickered once, then again. Finally, it surrendered to the growing daylight, leaving behind only a faint curl of smoke that drifted upward into the cool morning air. The lookout removed the lantern from its hook with practiced hands. He carefully wiped the glass chimney with a soft cloth before trimming the wick ever so slightly. It was a simple task that required only a few minutes, yet he performed it with the same care as every other responsibility entrusted to him. Small habits, repeated faithfully, made life on the mountain both comfortable and dependable. He placed the lantern back upon its shelf inside the cabin. Tonight it would shine once more. Outside, the air carried the unmistakable freshness that often followed a summer rain. Every pine needle glistened beneath tiny droplets of dew. Spider webs stretched between low shrubs, each delicate thread decorated with countless beads of water that sparkled like strings of tiny pearls whenever the rising sun reached them. The lookout paused to admire one particularly beautiful web woven between two young spruce trees. Its patient creator rested quietly at the center, waiting for the warmth of the day. Nature rarely hurried. It simply continued. The coffee kettle soon began its familiar whisper above the iron stove. Steam rose slowly from its spout, carrying the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee throughout the cabin. Breakfast remained modest. A slice of yesterday's bread. A little butter kept cool in the spring house. 2 fresh eggs gathered from a nearby homestead during the previous week's supply visit. And, of course, a warm cup of coffee enjoyed while looking out across the awakening wilderness. The lookout believed meals tasted better when accompanied by wide horizons. Perhaps it was simply the mountain air. Or perhaps peaceful surroundings quietly sharpened one's appreciation for ordinary comforts. After breakfast, he climbed the observation tower as he had done nearly every morning for years. The wooden steps responded with familiar creaks beneath his boots. Each sound felt almost welcoming. From the platform, the world appeared newly washed. The rain had swept away the faint summer haze that often softened distant views. Today, every ridge stood remarkably clear. Individual clusters of pine trees could be distinguished many miles away. The rivers below reflected the morning sunlight like polished ribbons of silver. Even isolated cabins tucked among distant valleys seemed easier to notice. He slowly swept the horizon with the brass spyglass. East, south, west, north. His movements remained steady and deliberate. Watching the forest was never a race. The mountains rewarded patience. Near a distant meadow, he noticed several elk grazing peacefully. A magnificent bull stood watch while cows and young calves wandered through tall summer grasses. Through the spyglass, he could see their ears constantly turning toward every small sound carried upon the breeze. They appeared completely undisturbed. The lookout quietly lowered the instrument. Healthy wildlife usually meant the forest itself remained healthy. It was another reassuring sign. Not long afterward, movement caught his attention along one of the lower ridges. This time it was not wildlife. A narrow wagon slowly emerged from between the trees. 2 sturdy horses pulled it carefully along the winding trail. A family was traveling west. The father guided the team with calm confidence. Beside him sat his wife, holding a wide-brimmed bonnet against the morning breeze. In the back of the wagon, 2 children sat among neatly stacked trunks, blankets, and simple household belongings. From this great distance, the lookout could not hear their voices. Yet he could easily imagine them. Perhaps the children pointed excitedly toward distant mountains. Perhaps their parents quietly discussed the next settlement where they hoped to build a new life. Thousands of families crossed the American frontier with dreams much like these. Some succeeded. Others faced difficult hardships. The lookout silently wished them safe travels before continuing his watch. By late morning, the gentle warmth of the sun had begun drying the forest floor. The scent of wet earth gradually gave way once more to warm pine, wild grasses, and cedar bark. Nearby, bees returned to the flower garden surrounding the cabin. Their steady humming blended beautifully with the songs of finches and sparrows hidden among the trees. Life resumed its familiar rhythm. The lookout descended from the tower carrying a small wooden toolbox. One section of the porch railing had loosened slightly after several seasons of snow and wind. Nothing serious. Still, mountain life taught an important lesson. Small repairs completed today prevented much larger repairs tomorrow. He tightened several wooden pegs with a light mallet before smoothing a rough edge using a well-worn hand plane. Curled ribbons of fresh pine fell gently onto the porch floor. The newly smoothed wood felt pleasant beneath his fingertips. He smiled with quiet satisfaction. There was something deeply comforting about caring for a place that had faithfully sheltered him through so many changing seasons. After putting away his tools, he walked to the edge of the summit where a narrow path overlooked a broad valley below. The afternoon breeze had begun to stir once again. White clouds drifted lazily overhead. Their shadows wandered peacefully across forests that stretched beyond imagination. He removed his hat for a moment and allowed the cool wind to pass through his hair. There were days when loneliness occasionally visited the mountain. That was only natural, but it never stayed for long. The forests provided constant company. The birds, the changing weather, the stars, the letters from home. Even the familiar creaking of the cabin at night seemed almost like quiet conversation. The mountain was never truly empty. It simply spoke in softer voices. As the afternoon settled gently across the American frontier, the lookout returned once more to the observation platform. The brass spyglass rested comfortably in his hands. Far beyond the western horizon, the first faint hints of autumn could almost be imagined, not yet visible, but quietly approaching with each passing sunrise. Summer still held the mountains in its warm embrace, yet every faithful observer knew that seasons, like travelers, never remained forever, and the lookout would be there to welcome each one. The first gentle signs of autumn. The following morning arrived with a quiet coolness that had not been present only a week before. It was not cold enough to require a heavy coat, nor sharp enough to make the lookout hurry indoors. Instead, it carried the kind of refreshing chill that encouraged a deeper breath. The mountain air felt wonderfully clear, almost as though the forests themselves had been quietly polished during the night. Before sunrise, he opened the cabin door. A thin layer of mist rested in the valleys far below, flowing slowly between the pine-covered hills like a gentle river of silver. Above the mist, only the highest ridges remained visible, floating peacefully beneath a sky slowly changing from deep navy to soft lavender. He stood silently with both hands wrapped around a warm enamel mug. The first sip of coffee seemed especially welcome on mornings like this. Nearby, the wildflowers surrounding the cabin looked slightly different. Many still bloomed with cheerful color, but a few had already begun to fade. Their petals curled gently toward the earth, making room for the seeds that would wait patiently through winter before greeting another spring. The mountain never resisted change. It accepted each season with remarkable grace. The lookout often thought people might live more peacefully if they learned the same lesson. As daylight gradually spread across the summit, he climbed to the observation platform carrying his weather journal beneath one arm. The wooden steps felt cool beneath his boots. Tiny droplets of dew sparkled along the handrail, catching the first golden light of morning. Reaching the top, he paused before opening the journal. There was no need to rush. This quiet moment belonged first to observation. The eastern horizon glowed warmly. Long beams of sunlight slowly crossed the valleys, touching distant hillsides one after another. Wherever the light arrived, the forests awakened in gentle waves. Birdsong followed. Then the rustle of squirrels among the branches. Then the faint whisper of wind passing through tall pines. The mountain always seemed to wake in the same patient order. He finally opened the journal. 6:12 a.m. clear skies. Light north breeze. Morning noticeably cooler. Excellent visibility. The pencil moved slowly. Each entry required only a few lines, yet together they formed the memory of countless mornings spent high above the frontier. After finishing his notes, he lifted the brass spyglass. Far below, a narrow creek reflected the early sunlight like a winding ribbon of polished glass. Beyond it stretched meadows where patches of golden grass had begun replacing the rich greens of midsummer. Autumn had not yet arrived, but its first footsteps could already be seen. Near one rocky hillside, a family of mule deer wandered quietly through the tall grass. A young fawn stayed close beside its mother, pausing now and then to investigate fallen pine cones scattered beneath the trees. The buck raised his head briefly toward the lookout tower. Although separated by a great distance, the lookout lowered his spyglass for a moment, smiling quietly. There was a peaceful understanding between those who simply observed and those who belonged to the wilderness. Neither wished to disturb the other. Later that morning, he decided to walk farther along the narrow trail that circled the summit. He carried only a small canvas satchel, a canteen of spring water, and his walking stick, polished smooth by years of use. The trail wound gently between clusters of ancient pines whose trunks carried the marks of countless seasons. Some had survived lightning strikes. Others bore deep scars where bears had sharpened their claws many years before. Every tree seemed to tell its own quiet story. Sunlight filtered through the branches in scattered patches, warming the forest floor where moss grew thick between weathered stones. Tiny mushrooms had appeared overnight after the recent rain. Some were no larger than a coin. Others spread wide beneath fallen logs like little woodland umbrellas. The lookout admired them carefully but never touched them. Mountain wisdom often began with knowing what to leave undisturbed. As he reached a small rocky overlook, he paused once again. From here, the valley appeared even broader than it had from the observation tower. The morning breeze carried the faint scent of cedar mixed with wild sage growing along the sunlit slopes. Somewhere below, he heard the steady tapping of a woodpecker echoing through the forest. The sound came slowly, patiently, as though even the birds understood the peaceful rhythm of the mountain. He sat upon a broad granite boulder warmed gently by the rising sun. For several quiet minutes, he simply listened. No wagon wheels, no church bells, no crowded streets, only wind, birdsong, flowing water hidden far below, and the occasional rustle of small animals moving through dry leaves. These sounds had become his nearest neighbors. Returning toward the cabin near midday, he noticed several pine cones scattered across the trail. The squirrels had already begun gathering their winter stores. Some hurried up the trees carrying cones nearly as large as their heads. Others disappeared into hidden burrows among the rocks. Even before the leaves began changing color, the smallest creatures already knew another season was slowly approaching. The lookout quietly admired their careful preparation. Life upon the frontier depended upon noticing small changes before they became large ones. That lesson belonged not only to people. Nature practiced it every day. Back at the cabin, he prepared a simple lunch of vegetable soup simmered gently over the iron stove. Fresh carrots from the garden, a handful of onions, beans, a little barley, a pinch of dried herbs gathered earlier in the summer. Nothing extravagant, yet the rich aroma soon filled the cabin with comforting warmth. He carried the bowl outside and sat upon the porch. The gentle breeze cooled each spoonful just enough before he tasted it. Far across the valleys, clouds drifted lazily above forests beginning their slow journey toward autumn. The mountain remained peaceful. The lookout remained patient, and somewhere beyond those distant ridges, another quiet season was already making its way toward the lonely little cabin that faithfully watched over the American frontier. Visitors on the mountain trail. By the time another week had quietly slipped by, the mornings had grown noticeably cooler. The lookout noticed it first in the small things. The coffee kettle took a little longer to begin singing above the stove. The porch boards held the night's chill until well after sunrise. A thin blanket, untouched through much of the summer, now rested once again across the foot of his bed. These gentle changes never arrived all at once. They appeared one ordinary day after another, almost too quietly to notice unless someone had learned to pay close attention. Life on the mountain had taught him exactly that. After recording the morning weather in his journal, he climbed the observation platform for his first survey of the day. The forests stretched endlessly beneath him, their deep green color now softened here and there by scattered patches of pale yellow. A few aspens along the lower slopes had begun their yearly transformation, catching the morning sunlight until they glowed like small islands of gold among the darker pines. Autumn had finally introduced itself, not boldly, simply with a gentle greeting. The lookout rested both hands upon the smooth wooden railing and allowed himself several quiet moments before lifting the brass spyglass. The wilderness rewarded patience. Every careful observer eventually noticed something new. Today it was movement along the eastern wagon trail. At first, only tiny shapes appeared between the trees. Slowly they became clearer. Not settlers this time, not freight wagons. A small group of travelers, 4 horses, 2 pack mules, 5 people making their way carefully toward one of the mountain passes. Their pace was unhurried. The trail demanded respect, especially where steep slopes narrowed beside rocky cliffs. Through the spyglass, the lookout could make out small details. A middle-aged guide rode in front with quiet confidence, occasionally turning in the saddle to check on the others. Behind him followed an elderly gentleman whose gray beard reached almost to the top buttons of his wool coat. A young woman rode beside him, her broad-brimmed hat tied securely beneath her chin against the mountain breeze. 2 younger riders brought up the rear, leading the pack animals loaded with neatly balanced canvas bundles and wooden crates. There was nothing unusual about them, only ordinary people making an ordinary journey. Yet from the summit, every traveler became part of the mountain's daily story. The lookout continued watching until the group disappeared beneath a stand of tall lodgepole pines. By afternoon, they would likely reach the small valley where several ranch families welcomed weary travelers with fresh water and a place to rest their horses. He quietly wished them safe travels. The wilderness asked much of those who crossed it, but it also offered generous rewards to those who respected its rhythms. Descending from the tower, he decided the cabin porch could use a fresh sweeping. The recent winds had scattered pine needles across the floorboards, while a few dry leaves had begun collecting in the corners. He fetched a sturdy handmade broom from inside the cabin. Its handle had grown smooth from years of use. The broom itself had been fashioned from tightly bound birch twigs by a craftsman in a small frontier town many seasons ago. With slow, steady strokes, he swept the porch clean. The rhythmic sound blended pleasantly with the breeze moving through the trees. Every few minutes he paused, leaning on the broom handle to admire the wide landscape stretching before him. No task felt burdensome when performed beneath such an open sky. When the porch was finished, he carried a small wooden bucket to the nearby spring. The narrow footpath wound gently between moss-covered rocks and clusters of ferns still bright from recent rains. The spring emerged quietly from beneath a granite ledge, its water so clear that every pebble resting on the bottom could be counted without difficulty. He filled the bucket slowly. The water felt wonderfully cold against his hands. Many travelers had paused here over the years, grateful for this dependable source of fresh mountain water. The lookout always felt thankful that the spring never seemed to fail, even during the driest summers. Returning to the cabin, he poured the fresh water into a large stone crock kept cool in the shade. Simple routines like these rarely changed from one season to the next. They created a comforting rhythm that marked the passing days more reliably than any calendar. As the afternoon unfolded, a pair of blue jays arrived near the garden. Their bright feathers flashed between the branches as they searched for acorns and seeds. Unlike the quieter chickadees, blue jays announced their presence without hesitation. Their lively calls echoed through the clearing before they disappeared once again into the surrounding forest. The lookout chuckled softly. Even the loudest voices seemed gentle upon the mountain. Later, while repairing the leather strap on his field satchel, he heard the distant sound of horse hooves. Not many, only one. Setting aside his work, he stepped onto the porch. Before long, a lone rider appeared around the bend in the trail. It was the same mail carrier who visited the lookout once each month. His weathered horse climbed the final stretch of the path with calm determination, while the familiar leather mailbag rested securely against the saddle. The two men greeted each other with warm smiles that needed very few words. In places as remote as this, friendship often grew through shared silences as much as through conversation. The mail carrier handed over several folded newspapers, a small parcel wrapped carefully in brown paper, and 2 letters. One bore his sister's familiar handwriting. The other came from the forestry office in the valley, requesting the usual monthly weather summaries before winter arrived. They sat together on the porch for a while, sharing hot coffee and slices of fresh bread spread with homemade apple butter. The mail carrier spoke of bustling towns below the mountains where harvest festivals were beginning. Children had decorated wagons with pumpkins and corn stalks. Farmers were gathering the last of their summer crops. Apple orchards were filling wooden barrels destined for markets many miles away. The lookout listened with genuine interest. Though he treasured the quiet solitude of the summit, he enjoyed hearing how life continued beyond the endless forests he watched each day. As the sun slowly lowered toward the western horizon, the visitor tightened his saddle, waved one final farewell, and guided his faithful horse back down the winding trail. The sound of hooves gradually faded into the whispering pines. Soon, the mountain returned to its familiar stillness. The lookout remained on the porch a little longer, holding his sister's newest letter in one hand while the cool evening breeze carried the scent of cedar and the first fallen leaves of the season. There would be time to read her words after supper. For now, he simply watched the golden light drift across the valleys below, grateful for another peaceful day spent watching over the quiet American frontier. The golden harvest below. The letter from his sister rested safely inside the cabin overnight. The lookout had read it slowly by lantern light, smiling at every simple detail she had shared. She wrote that the apple trees had bent beneath the weight of a generous harvest, that neighbors were helping one another gather corn before the colder weather arrived, and that the children had already begun collecting brightly colored leaves to press inside their school books. As he folded the pages and slipped them carefully back into their envelope, he found himself thinking about how differently autumn arrived in the valleys compared with the lonely mountain where he lived. Down below, the season was measured by harvest wagons, busy kitchens, and families working together from sunrise until dusk. Up here, autumn announced itself through quieter signs. The wind lingered a little longer after sunset. The stars seemed brighter in the cooler air. The first leaves drifted silently across the forest floor. The mountain spoke softly, but it never failed to speak. The next morning arrived beneath a cloudless sky. Before dawn, the lookout stepped outside, carrying his familiar enamel mug. The eastern horizon glowed with a gentle ribbon of amber light, while the western peaks still rested beneath the fading stars. The air felt wonderfully crisp. Each breath carried the refreshing scent of pine resin, damp moss, and cedar that had slowly dried after several cool evenings. He pulled his wool sweater a little closer around his shoulders before climbing the observation tower. The sunrise unfolded patiently. Golden light touched the highest granite cliffs first, then the distant ridges, then the endless forests below. Every passing minute revealed another layer of the American frontier. The lookout opened his weather journal. 6:05 a.m. clear skies. Cool morning. Light eastern breeze. Visibility exceptional. Autumn colors increasing across lower valleys. He closed the journal gently. There would be many more mornings like this before winter arrived. Looking through the brass spyglass, he noticed several narrow columns of pale smoke rising from scattered farmsteads far below. None caused concern. These were comforting signs of ordinary life. Breakfast fires, wood-burning stoves warming quiet kitchens, families preparing for another busy day. One farmhouse stood beside a winding creek where several horses grazed peacefully inside a fenced pasture. Nearby, 2 children chased a flock of geese across the yard while an older woman hung freshly washed blankets upon a long clothesline. The blankets fluttered gracefully in the morning breeze. It was a scene so ordinary that many would have overlooked it. The lookout watched for a few moments before lowering the spyglass. Ordinary moments were often the most beautiful. Later that morning, he decided to inspect the narrow trail leading toward the western edge of the summit. Autumn winds sometimes scattered fallen branches across the path, making travel more difficult for the occasional visitor. Carrying his walking stick, he moved slowly beneath towering pines whose upper branches whispered gently above his head. Sunlight filtered through the trees in long golden beams. Here and there, clusters of maple saplings had begun changing color. Some leaves glowed pale yellow. Others had turned soft shades of orange. A few brilliant reds appeared like tiny lanterns among the evergreens. The forest was quietly painting itself for another season. As he rounded a bend in the trail, a familiar sound reached his ears. The cheerful tapping of a woodpecker. He paused. High above, the bird worked patiently against the weathered trunk of an old pine. Each gentle tap echoed through the quiet woods. Not hurried, not frantic. Simply another creature following its daily routine. The lookout remained still until the bird finally spread its wings and disappeared deeper into the forest. He continued walking. Near a small clearing, he stopped beside a cluster of berry bushes. Most of the berries had already been gathered by birds and small animals preparing for winter. Only a handful remained, shining brightly beneath the morning sun. Nature wasted very little. Every fruit, every seed, every fallen leaf eventually became part of another quiet beginning. Returning to the cabin shortly before noon, he noticed a light breeze carrying dry leaves across the clearing. They moved with surprising grace, swirling briefly before settling once again upon the earth. One leaf landed gently upon the porch steps. He picked it up. Its edges had turned a rich golden color while the center still held traces of summer green. For a long moment, he simply admired its delicate veins. Such small things often escaped notice. Yet they quietly marked the passing of time more faithfully than calendars ever could. Inside the cabin, the lookout prepared a simple midday meal. A pot of vegetable stew simmered slowly upon the iron stove. Carrots, potatoes, onions, a little dried thyme gathered during late summer. Fresh bread rested beside the bowl, still carrying the pleasant aroma of the loaf baked several days earlier. As he ate beside the open window, cool mountain air drifted gently through the room. The breeze carried the distant scent of wood smoke. Someone in the valley below had likely begun burning small piles of fallen branches after the harvest. The smell reminded him of childhood autumns spent helping his father stack firewood before the first snowfall. Those memories returned quietly, without sadness, only with gratitude. The afternoon passed peacefully. He sharpened several pencils used for weather observations. He repaired a loose button on his heavy wool coat. He organized the shelves where canned vegetables, flour, dried beans, and preserved fruit were carefully stored for the colder months ahead. Every task carried the same gentle purpose. Preparing today made tomorrow a little easier. As shadows slowly lengthened across the mountains, he climbed the tower once more for his final observation of the day. The setting sun bathed the valleys in warm amber light. Fields below glowed like polished gold. Harvest wagons moved slowly along dusty roads, returning home after another day's work. Thin streams reflected the evening sky like ribbons of copper. Far beyond them, endless forests stretched toward the horizon, calm and timeless beneath the approaching twilight. The lookout rested both hands upon the smooth wooden railing. The mountain had changed again, almost without anyone noticing. Summer had quietly stepped aside. Autumn now walked confidently through the valleys below, and high above it all, the lonely little fire lookout continued his faithful watch, not only over the forests, but over the quiet passage of the seasons themselves, preparing for the long winter. By the middle of autumn, the mountain carried a different kind of silence. It was not emptiness. It was expectation. The forests no longer echoed with the busy songs of summer birds from dawn until dusk. Many had already begun their long journeys toward warmer skies, while those that remained seemed content to speak more softly, as though respecting the slower rhythm that settled over the wilderness each passing day. The lookout noticed these changes with quiet appreciation. Nothing arrived suddenly on the mountain. Every season announced itself gently, allowing anyone who paid attention enough time to prepare. Before sunrise, he opened the cabin door and stepped into air so crisp that each breath felt wonderfully fresh. A pale crescent moon still hung above the western peaks, while the eastern horizon slowly welcomed another day with soft ribbons of silver and rose. The stars lingered a little longer than they had during summer. Long autumn nights had begun reclaiming the mountain. He wrapped his thick wool coat around his shoulders and climbed the familiar staircase to the observation platform. The wooden steps creaked beneath his boots just as they always had. Some sounds never changed. Reaching the top, he rested his hands upon the railing and looked across the endless frontier. The valleys below disappeared beneath a blanket of white morning mist. Only scattered hilltops rose above it like quiet islands floating upon a peaceful sea. Watching the fog slowly drift between the forests had become one of his favorite autumn rituals. It never hurried. It simply wandered wherever the mountain invited it. When the first sunlight reached the highest ridges, the mist began dissolving almost magically. One valley appeared, then another. Farmhouses slowly emerged from the whiteness. Wagon roads became visible once more. Streams reflected the morning light like narrow ribbons of silver. The mountain seemed to awaken piece by piece. Opening his weather journal, he carefully wrote another familiar entry. 6:18 a.m., heavy valley fog before sunrise. Clear above the summit, light frost upon the porch railing, wind calm. The mention of frost made him glance toward the cabin below. Sure enough, the wooden porch shimmered with tiny crystals left behind by the cool night. Each blade of grass sparkled beneath the growing sunlight. The first frost of the season always felt special. It quietly reminded everyone that winter had begun its slow journey across the mountains. Descending from the tower, he gathered a woven basket and walked toward the small woodshed standing beside the cabin. Throughout the summer, he had carefully stacked split pine and fir beneath its roof, allowing each log to dry thoroughly. Now the time had come to prepare larger supplies inside the cabin. One armful at a time, he carried neatly split firewood through the front door. Each log released the pleasant scent of fresh resin. Some pieces still displayed pale golden wood beneath their rough bark. Others had darkened gently after months of drying beneath the mountain air. He stacked them carefully beside the iron stove, not too close, not too far, exactly where they would remain dry and easy to reach during snowy evenings. By the time the final armful had been carried inside, the neat stack reached nearly to his waist. He stepped back with quiet satisfaction. Winter demanded preparation, but it also rewarded those who planned ahead. After a short rest, he inspected the cabin roof using a sturdy wooden ladder kept beneath the porch. Autumn winds occasionally loosened wooden shingles, and heavy mountain snow showed little kindness toward neglected repairs. Moving carefully along the roofline, he examined each section one by one. Most remained secure. Only 2 shingles required replacement. Using simple hand tools and several spare cedar shingles stored inside the shed, he completed the repair before midday. The work was unhurried. Mountain life rarely benefited from rushing. Every careful movement today meant fewer worries during winter storms. Climbing down the ladder, he noticed a familiar visitor waiting near the vegetable garden, a red fox. Its thick autumn coat glowed warmly beneath the afternoon sunlight. The animal stood perfectly still, watching him with bright, curious eyes. For several quiet moments, neither moved. The fox tilted its head ever so slightly. The lookout smiled but remained where he was. At last, the fox turned gracefully and disappeared into the tall grass beyond the clearing. Its bushy tail vanished among the pines without making the slightest sound. Encounters like these reminded him that he was never truly alone upon the mountain. The wilderness accepted him because he had learned to become part of its quiet rhythm rather than disturb it. Inside the cabin, the afternoon became devoted to smaller preparations. He checked the lantern oil, sharpened several spare pencils, folded clean wool blankets, counted sacks of flour, dried beans, oats, coffee, and salt. He examined each carefully before writing the remaining supplies inside a small notebook kept beside the pantry shelves. There was comfort in knowing exactly what the coming months would require. As daylight slowly faded, he prepared one final task before supper. Behind the cabin stood a small wooden rain barrel connected beneath the roof. Although useful through spring and summer, freezing temperatures could split the barrel if water remained inside. He opened the small wooden spout near its base. Cool water flowed gently into the earth below, disappearing among fallen leaves already covering the ground. Soon the barrel stood empty, ready for winter. Simple precautions like this often saved weeks of difficult repairs after the snow finally melted. The evening arrived quietly. The western sky glowed with warm shades of amber, copper, and pale crimson before gradually fading into deep blue. The lookout lit the familiar oil lantern beside the porch door. Its soft golden glow welcomed the approaching night exactly as it had done hundreds of evenings before. Inside, a small fire crackled comfortably within the iron stove. A pot of beef and barley stew simmered slowly, filling the cabin with the rich aroma of herbs, onions, and freshly baked bread warming nearby. He carried his supper onto the porch. Wrapped in his heavy wool coat, he watched the first stars appear one by one above the silent forests. Far below, scattered lights flickered inside distant valley homes. Families gathered around their own fireplaces. Children listened to bedtime stories. Neighbors finished another ordinary day together. High above them all, one quiet cabin glowed gently beneath the endless autumn sky. The lookout took another slow sip of warm coffee. Winter was coming, not as an enemy, but as another faithful season. And just as he had welcomed spring blossoms, summer rains, and autumn harvests, he would quietly welcome winter too, for every season had its own peaceful story to tell. Beneath the first snow, a few mornings later, the lookout awoke before dawn to a silence unlike any he had heard since arriving on the mountain months before. The familiar whisper of pine branches had nearly disappeared. No gentle breeze brushed against the cabin walls. No loose leaves skipped across the porch. Even the little creek below the ridge seemed quieter, as though it, too, had paused to greet the changing season. He remained still for a moment beneath his warm wool blanket, listening carefully. There was something wonderfully peaceful about the mountain that morning. It felt as though the entire wilderness had taken one long, gentle breath. He rose slowly, pulled on his heavy boots and thick coat, and lit the small oil lamp that rested beside his bed. Its soft amber glow filled the cabin while the iron stove still held a little warmth from the evening before. After placing another carefully chosen piece of pine upon the glowing embers, he watched the fire awaken once again. Tiny flames stretched upward with quiet determination. Soon the familiar crackling sound returned. There was comfort in routines that never seemed to change. The coffee kettle found its place above the stove. Fresh spring water began warming. The pleasant aroma of roasted coffee slowly filled the room. Only then did he walk toward the front door. When he opened it, he smiled without saying a word. During the night, the mountain had received its first snowfall. It was not deep. Perhaps only 2 or 3 inches rested upon the ground. Yet every familiar corner of the summit had been transformed. The cabin roof wore a smooth white blanket. The porch railing carried delicate ridges of fresh snow. Every pine branch bowed gracefully beneath its soft new covering. Even the observation tower looked quieter beneath its snowy cap. The lookout stepped carefully onto the porch. His boots pressed gentle footprints into the untouched snow, each one leaving a clear reminder that someone still kept watch over this lonely summit. The cold air felt wonderfully clean. Each breath carried the crisp scent of pine, cedar, and fresh snow. Somewhere nearby, a raven called once before disappearing into the pale morning sky. Otherwise, the mountain remained beautifully still. He climbed the observation tower more slowly than usual. A thin layer of snow covered each wooden step, so he brushed them carefully aside with a small hand broom kept for exactly this purpose. Safety had always been part of his daily routine. There was never any reward for unnecessary haste. At the top of the tower, he paused. The view seemed almost endless. The valleys below remained hidden beneath a sea of white mist, while the surrounding peaks shone brilliantly beneath the first light of dawn. Snow-covered forests stretched toward every horizon, their dark evergreens creating gentle patterns against the bright landscape. The rising sun slowly painted the eastern sky with soft shades of pink, gold, and pale lavender. As its first rays reached the snowy branches, thousands of tiny crystals sparkled like scattered stars. The lookout removed his gloves for just a moment so he could write inside his weather journal, 6:34 a.m. first measurable snowfall of the season, approximately 3 inches at the summit, wind calm, visibility excellent above the valleys. His fingers quickly reminded him why gloves belonged on mountain mornings. He smiled softly and slipped them back on. The journal closed with its familiar leather strap. Another season had officially begun. After completing his observations, he remained on the platform a little longer. There was no smoke rising from distant forests, no unusual movement along the trails, only peaceful wilderness resting beneath fresh snow. Satisfied, he descended and returned to the cabin. Breakfast felt especially comforting that morning. Warm oatmeal sweetened with a little honey, fresh coffee, a slice of bread toasted gently beside the stove. Outside the window, snowflakes still drifted lazily from the branches whenever a curious squirrel hurried past. Even the smallest movements seemed softer now. Later that morning, he picked up a sturdy wooden shovel and cleared a narrow path between the cabin, woodshed, and observation tower. The work was slow but pleasant. Each careful sweep revealed the weathered wooden boards beneath. He paused often, not because he was tired, but because the scenery invited quiet admiration. Snow transformed familiar places into something almost dreamlike. By midday, pale sunshine had begun melting tiny patches of snow from the south-facing rocks. Drops of water sparkled before falling gently into the moss below. Winter had arrived, but autumn had not entirely departed. For a little while, both seasons shared the mountain together. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. A snowshoe hare emerged cautiously from beneath a cluster of young fir trees. Its coat had already begun changing from brown to white, leaving it beautifully suited to neither season completely. The little animal stopped only a short distance from the porch. Its ears twitched, its nose quivered. Then, satisfied that everything remained peaceful, it continued hopping quietly across the clearing before disappearing into the forest. The lookout watched until it was gone. Moments like these never grew ordinary. As evening approached, the western sky glowed with rich amber light reflected across the snowy landscape. The forest seemed brighter than usual, as though every tree carried a little of the sunset within its branches. Inside the cabin, the fire burned warmly. The kettle whispered softly. The familiar lantern waited beside the doorway for another night of faithful service. After supper, he unfolded his sister's most recent letter and read it once more. Her words felt especially comforting on snowy evenings. She wrote of children eagerly waiting for winter, of apples stored safely in the cellar, of neighbors helping one another stack firewood before heavier storms arrived. Though separated by many miles, both brother and sister welcomed the same season beneath different skies. Before retiring for the night, the lookout stepped outside one final time. The stars shone with remarkable clarity above the silent mountain. Fresh snow reflected their light so gently that the landscape seemed to glow from within. He looked across the sleeping forests that had been his companions through spring blossoms, summer rains, golden autumn days, and now the quiet beginning of winter. He realized that the mountain had never truly belonged to any single season. Its beauty simply changed its clothing throughout the year. The lookout lifted the lantern from its hook and carried it inside. Its warm light danced gently across the wooden walls before he lowered the flame. Soon the cabin grew peaceful once more. Outside, snow rested quietly upon the endless American frontier. Inside, the little fire continued its gentle crackle, and beneath the moonlit sky, another ordinary day in the forgotten life of an 1880s mountain fire lookout came to a calm and comforting end, leaving only the steady rhythm of the wilderness, the warmth of a well-kept cabin, and the quiet promise that tomorrow's sunrise would begin another peaceful chapter in the timeless story of the mountains.